Let's talk about the gang itself. 15 men. Some of them would become famous. Some of them would die in prison. One of them would become arguably the most celebrated fugitive in British criminal history. But in the summer of 1963, they were just men with a plan, a farmhouse, and a deadline. The chosen location was Bridego Railway Bridge, near the village of Ledburn in Buckinghamshire. A remote stretch. Low population. A road running directly underneath the bridge, perfect for loading vehicles. Reynolds leased a nearby farm, Leatherslade Farm, as the operational base, 17 miles from the bridge. Remote enough to hide in. Close enough to reach quickly. The plan, in its broad strokes, was elegant. 1. Approach the trackside signal post before the train arrives. 2. Cover the green light. Attach a battery to illuminate the red. 3. The driver sees red, stops the train at the bridge. 4. A gang member overpowers the driver and moves the train into the right position. 5. A human chain passes 120 mailbags, weighing approximately 2.5 tons, off the carriage, down the embankment, and into 3 waiting army trucks. 6. Drive to Leatherslade Farm. Lie low for a week. Then disperse. Simple. Audacious. Almost elegant. There was just one problem. One catastrophic, embarrassing, almost comedic problem, and it nearly ended the entire robbery before a single bag was moved. They didn't have anyone who could drive a train. I know. The plan was to stop the train, overpower driver Jack Mills, and then move the train approximately half a mile forward to a position where the embankment was accessible for unloading. Standard practice on a train of that era required knowing how to operate the controls. They had recruited a man they believed was a retired train driver. A man who said he knew the controls. Who said he could do it. On the night, under pressure, with the clock running, he froze. He stood at the controls of the locomotive and admitted he couldn't remember how to operate it. In the most consequential improvisation of the entire operation, one of the gang members, in desperation, turned to Jack Mills, the driver they had just coshed over the head with a cosh hard enough to leave him bleeding, and asked him to drive his own train forward. Mills, injured, bleeding, frightened, complied. The train moved the necessary distance. And the robbery continued. But that moment, that brutal, chaotic moment, would define how history judged the Great Train Robbery, because Jack Mills never fully recovered. And the gang's treatment of him would transform them, in the public imagination, from cheeky rogues into something darker. It's important to pause here and be clear about something the romanticized version of this story often glosses over. Jack Mills was 57 years old. He was assaulted from behind by men wearing balaclavas. He sustained head injuries that would cause him chronic pain for the rest of his life. He returned to work, but never drove a train again. He died in 1970, 7 years after the robbery. His fireman, David Whitby, witnessed the attack and was deeply traumatized. He too died young. The gang did not plan to seriously injure anyone. But the violence happened, and the consequences, for the victims, and for the gang's subsequent treatment by the courts, were severe. 2:30 a.m., August 8, 1963. The travelling post office, the Up Special, departs Glasgow, running south. On board, 72 postal workers sorting mail. 5 dedicated to the high-value package carriage. And 120 mailbags containing £2.6 million in old banknotes. In Buckinghamshire, 15 men in dark clothing move through the fields toward Bridego Bridge. Their vehicles are positioned. Their torches are masked. Nobody speaks above a whisper. 2:45 a.m. The signal man approaches the gantry. He covers the green light with a glove. He wires the battery to the red. The signal turns red. 3:03 a.m. Driver Jack Mills rounds a gentle curve and sees the red signal ahead. He applies the brakes. Standard procedure. The train decelerates. He thinks nothing of it. Red signals happen. He'll wait. It'll change. It does not change. And in that moment of waiting, in those few seconds where Jack Mills sat in his cab, mildly irritated, assuming a signaling error, the doors on both sides opened simultaneously, and 15 men poured onto the train. It was coordinated, rehearsed, drilled for weeks. Whitby, the fireman, was grabbed as he stepped out to investigate the signal. Mills was attacked from behind. Below, on the embankment, a human chain formed. 120 mailbags, each weighing roughly 20 kilograms, passed hand to hand, down the slope, into the waiting army trucks. 15 men. 15 minutes and 23 seconds. £2.6 million loaded and gone. They drove into the night. At 4:20 a.m., the first police reports came in. By 5 a.m., Scotland Yard was awake. By 6 a.m., it was the biggest story in Britain. The investigation that followed was, depending on your perspective, either a masterpiece of British detective work or a comedy of delayed brilliance. Because the truth is, the gang very nearly got away with it entirely. Their plan called for them to stay hidden at Leatherslade Farm for 2 weeks. Long enough for the initial search radius to expand and then contract. Long enough to become invisible. But someone panicked. Someone hired a cleaner. Someone thought, we need to clean the farm, remove the fingerprints, leave no trace. And that decision, that entirely sensible, careful decision, is what led police directly to the front door. The gang left Leatherslade Farm after just a few days, earlier than planned. They hired a man to come in and clean the place. He took the money. And then, apparently calculating that the reward was larger, he told the police. Officers arrived at Leatherslade Farm on August 13, 5 days after the robbery. What they found was extraordinary. The farm hadn't been cleaned at all. The man had taken the payment and done almost nothing. The place was a forensic gold mine. Monopoly boards with fingerprints on the pieces. Sleeping bags. Food packaging. A ketchup bottle. Tire tracks. Boot prints. And most damningly, one of the gang had used a section of railing to practice driving, and left clear, identifiable prints. Within days, Scotland Yard had names. Arrests came quickly for most of the gang. Gordon Goody. Charlie Wilson. Roy James. Bob Welsh. Jimmy Hussey. Tommy Wispey. One by one, they were picked up. Some at home. Some had already moved. Some had spent money too quickly and drawn attention. The trials in 1964 were sensational. The sentences were savage. Most of the gang received 25 years, sentences that shocked even the prosecution team. The judge, it was widely noted, seemed to want to make an example. The establishment had been humiliated. And it was going to make sure this never happened again. But here's where the story gets genuinely strange. Because two of the most famous figures from the entire affair, the two names you probably know if you know this story at all, didn't just escape the police. They escaped from prison. Charlie Wilson was the first. In August 1964, just 4 months into his 25-year sentence, a team of 3 men broke into Winson Green Prison. They scaled the walls. They got to Wilson's cell. And they walked him out, over the wall, and into a waiting car. No shots fired. No alarm. So quiet the prison didn't realize he was gone until morning. Wilson fled to Canada, then eventually to Spain, where he lived in a villa with his family, seemingly untouchable. He was recaptured in 1968 by Detective Tommy Butler, the Scotland Yard officer who had made the train robbery his personal obsession. But Wilson's escape was nothing compared to what came next. Ronnie Biggs was, by most accounts, one of the minor figures in the robbery. He contributed little. He was brought in late. His main claim to fame was knowing someone who claimed to know a retired train driver. The driver, as we've discussed, turned out to be useless.